Hello again, my name is Lindsay Wargo, and I'm going to be discussing the fifth question regarding the goals and objectives for students studying educational and school psychology. Because graduate students studying school psychology are significantly responsible for future educational outcomes, there are a number of ethical considerations and competencies that students should acquire during training in order to become successful and efficient practitioners. The article Expanding the Professional Opportunities and Improving the Quality of Training, A Look Towards the Next Generation of School Psychologists by Jack Creamer, discussed the need to re-examine the current approaches to training. Although this article was written in 1991 and many of the issues discussed have now been resolved, it provides an understanding of the concerns at the time and how training has improved over the years. This need for change was evidenced by federal legislation, conceptual appeals to broaden partnerships, population served, service delivery settings, and empirical research. So, for example, much research had been written regarding the need for school psychologists to expand their skills. Legislation guaranteed that more opportunities for school psychologists to provide services would arise, and research documented the inefficiency of the current delivery system, as well as the need for school psychologists to implement new and productive approaches. Creamer advocated for an alternative model of psychological service delivery that envisioned school psychologists in settings outside of education agencies. He argued that university programs should increase efforts to train psychologists in a broader range of skills by altering both the content and process of academic and supervised activities. Creamer stated, trainers should provide school psychology students with the skills to allow them to move into schools as well as other agencies and to become change agents rather than robotic number generators assigning children irrelevant labels leading to ineffective programs. Unfortunately, at the time, school psychologists were not thought of as having the skills needed in order to contribute to a wide variety of services and settings. In fact, a survey at an annual APA meeting asked participants to rank 17 positions held by psychologists from most to least successful, and school psychologist was actually ranked last on the list of all positions held. Although there are various concerns, this article focused on two specific problems that trainers were facing, which included the need to change the nature and focus of assessment skills taught in training programs, and the need to increase and strengthen the extent of training options available. Although the field was aware that school psychologists needed to engage in more productive activities, controlling pressures made this change difficult. For example, school systems often limited school psychologists to traditional testing in order to meet federal and state mandates, and therefore, most psychologists were trained solely as diagnosticians. Regarding the second concern, Creamer argued that school psychologists had the ability to be beneficial additions to many organizations, but unfortunately, there was a shortage of sites where school psychologists could get the experience and appropriate supervision to work in these environments. So Creamer provided a few suggestions to address these concerns for the next generation of training. 3 suggestions are provided in order to de-emphasize the importance of traditional assessments. These include the suggestions that less coursework should be devoted to standardized, norm-reference, intellectual, and academic testing. Traditional testing coursework should be moved to later in the course sequence, and students should be taught only basic information about tests and administration, ideally in a class combined with other content. Creamer also provides 5 general suggestions to prepare school psychology students to overcome the issues that limit their range of professional opportunities. These suggestions include greater diversity in practicum and internship sites, increased number of training sites so that trainers can shape the nature of student experiences, heightened attention regarding professional preparation and with families, commitment towards incorporation of cultural and ethnic minority issues into curricula, and lastly, a need for cross-disciplinary and interagency collaboration in pre- and in-service education. Creamer argues that if school psychology graduate students continue to give in to the pressures of administering out-of-date instruments, then trainers are to blame. He also believes that as the field begins to recognize its potential, an expansion of opportunities for professional development and practice can be realized. In more recent years, the National Association of School Psychologists, or NASP, has developed various standards and principles in order to provide a foundation for school psychology and address some of the issues previously stated. The NASP model for comprehensive and integrated school psychological services is designed to be used in combination with the NASP standards for graduate preparation of school psychologists, standards for credentialing of school psychologists, and principles for professional ethics in order to provide a consolidated set of national principles that guide graduate education, credentialing, professional practice and services, and ethical behavior. So the model for comprehensive and integrated school psychological services serves as the official policy of NASP regarding the delivery of services. So it provides the services that are typically expected to be provided by school psychologists, and it aims to educate the profession and public concerning appropriate professional practice and ideally provoke continued development of the profession. So this model includes two sections. The first is professional principles, which is aligned with 10 domains of practice that are considered to be the core concept of this model. And the second is organizational principles, which are to be implemented by the organizations employing the school psychologist. But for the purpose of this assignment, I'm only going to examine the first section of the model. Graduate education in school psychology should prepare practitioners with the basic professional competencies of both knowledge and skills in the 10 domains, as well as the ability to apply these skills across domains. So these 10 domains include database decision-making and accountability, consultation and collaboration, interventions and instructional support to develop academic skills, interventions in mental health services to develop social and life skills, school-wide practices to promote learning, preventative and responsive services, family school collaboration services, diversity in development and learning, research and program evaluation, and lastly, legal, ethical, and professional practice. So the model goes into depth on all 10 of these models in regards to the knowledge and skills needed to demonstrate competency in each of the practice areas, and it provides specific examples of what professional practice would look like in each of these domains. Next, the NASP Principles for Professional Ethics was developed to address the unique circumstances correlated with providing school psychological services. Through this framework, school psychologists are expected to make careful, reasoned, and principled ethical choices based on knowledge of the code, recognizing that responsibility for ethical content rests within the individual practitioner. The framework consists of 4 broad ethical themes, which make up 17 ethical principles. Each principle is further expressed by various specific standards of conduct. The broad themes, principles, and ethical standards should all be considered when school psychologists are making educational decisions. Under the broad theme of respecting the dignity and rights of all persons, 3 principles are discussed, which are autonomy and self-determination, privacy and confidentiality, and fairness and justice. The broad theme of professional competence and responsibility is composed of 5 ethical principles, and these are competence, accepting responsibility for actions, responsible assessment and intervention practices, responsible school-based record keeping, and responsible use of materials. The theme of honesty and integrity in professional relationships includes 4 principles, which are accurate presentation of professional qualifications, forthright explanation of professional services, roles, and priorities, respecting others, and multiple relationships or conflicts of interest. And lastly, the broad theme of responsibility to school, families, community, the profession, and society is made up of 5 principles. These are promoting healthy school, family, and community environments, respect for the law and their relationship for law and ethics, maintaining public trust by self-monitoring and peer monitoring, contributing to the profession by mentoring, teaching, and supervision, and contributing to the school psychology knowledge base. Each of these principles includes a brief statement to specify exactly what is expected in the specific area. So these two frameworks are used to guide the field and hold school psychologists to high standards, and therefore it is imperative that school psychology students are taught not only what these standards require, but also how to uphold these standards in their daily practice. The article Delivering School-Based Mental Health Services by School Psychologists by Michelle Perfect and Richard Morris discusses their view of training and provides recommendation for graduate-level coursework and field experiences. They identify several key areas in which they believe training is necessary for school psychologists. In regards to therapeutic intervention, the article argues that training programs should provide coursework in the areas of counseling and psychotherapy, including training in evidence-based interventions. Regarding crisis intervention, the authors believe that school psychologists should be well trained in the assessment of risk factors related to physical, emotional, or sexual abuse, suicide risk assessment, and risk assessment for other dangerous characteristics. Another area that should be included in training is pediatric psychopharmacology. They argue that school psychologists should understand the side effects of various psychotropic medications and be knowledgeable in the biological basis of behavior. Relating to field experience, training programs should provide practice experiences in the implementation of EBIs and therapeutic interventions with supervision by a school psychologist who is competent in these areas. The provision of services also needs to be addressed within the context of ethical principles for professional practice. And the authors argue that an ethics and professional standards course is the best way to address this need. Regarding competency, although completing coursework in a particular service delivery does not make one competent, it does provide students with a sufficient background to pursue advanced training in the specific content area. School psychologists are not expected to be experts in every area, but they must know their limitations. Concerning informed consent, the author suggests that even if a consent document was signed before a meeting with a school psychologist, the school psychologist still needs to discuss the specific services that will be provided with the client and family. In the area of confidentiality, the article states, it is the responsibility of the school psychologist to inform the student and his or her parent or guardian whether the student-school psychologist communications are privileged and under what conditions such privileges may be broken. In addition, mental health records are important in order to track student progress, evaluate the relative effectiveness of treatment, record the types of issues being addressed, and evaluate the type, frequency, and duration of the treatment. The article states that school psychologists are obligated to inform the parent and student of where these records will be stored, who owns the records, what information will be included, under what conditions the copies can be obtained by school personnel or legal system without their permission, the length of time before records are destroyed. Regarding multiple relationships, 3 concepts should be considered when determining whether a multiple relationship issue is present. These are power, exploitation, and confidentiality. The authors also proposed that the next steps are for state agencies and professional groups to develop a series of task force to more clearly identify specific competencies associated with service delivery and types of graduate courses that will successfully prepare school psychology students. Another issue that is an essential component of education and training of school psychologists is practicum experiences. Although all programs recognize the importance and the need for practicum opportunities, the content, quality, and length of practicum experiences varies significantly across programs. Recent guidelines from the Association of State and Provincial Psychology Boards has allowed for the emerging option of including practicum experiences in combination with internship towards licensure requirements. This has raised a number of questions for school psychology in particular. The Council of Directors of School Psychology Programs have organized a task force to address the issues of competencies and supervision in practicum experiences. The article Evolving Practicum Issues in School Psychology Preparation by Lee and Fiorello summarizes these issues and provides recommendations for school psychology training programs. Although NASP's approval for school psychology programs placed some control on practicum training, under the current broad NASP guidelines, trainers are managing practicum experiences based on their own interpretations, which has resulted in differences in conceptualization, content, format, required hours, outcome evaluation, qualification of supervisors, and quality control. This review reveals a need for a clear definition of practicum, adoption of minimum requirements for qualifying practicum sites and supervisors, and recommends benchmarks and assessment tools to evaluate practicum student competencies. Current issues for school psychology practicum at the doctoral level is also discussed. Lee states that 7 states are already currently accepting pre-internship hours toward licensure rather than requiring postdoctoral hours. This has resulted in an increasing scrutiny being applied to the experiences, competencies, and supervision available in practicum settings. And this change has also raised a number of questions, including how many practicum hours should be required, what counts for practicum hours, what competencies are to be gained in practicum, what tools are to be used to assess practicum competencies, how trainees should be supervised, how appropriate practicum sites can be identified, and how communication between practicum sites and graduate training programs can be improved. Based on the needs of the field and the work of the CDSPP Practicum Task Force, the authors provided recommendations at the national, state, or local, and program levels. At the national level, the article suggests that the Competency Assessment Toolkit for Professional Psychology be reviewed, adapted, and aligned with the competency outline. It is also recommended that the current guidelines on practicum experience for licensure be reviewed and adapted to ensure appropriateness for school psychology specifically. At the state and local levels, the authors encouraged increased communication between graduate programs and practicum sites in order to address the confusion regarding expectations. In addition, professional organizations at the state level should be aware of the adaptations necessary for school psychology so that any changes in licensure legislation will consider those changes. Finally, at the program level, it is suggested that training program faculty members review the ASPPB website guidelines and practicum experience for licensure, as well as the adapted practicum competencies outline. Further, training directors should examine the current practice of practicum in their specific program in reference to the professional documents in order to develop written practicum agreements for their students. So in conclusion, as the fields of educational and school psychology continue to change, the goals and objectives for graduate students will continue to change as well. It is important that trainers keep up with these changes and make appropriate adjustments to graduate programs in order to produce competent and well-prepared school psychologists. However, even as modifications are made in training programs, the central goal and objective of every practicing and training school psychologist should be improving education in hopes of positively affecting the lives of many children.